Hey, RotoBallers, welcome back. I'm Pierre Camus, the Roto Chef, here to give you my running back rankings for the 2021 season. It is the middle of the preseason. We're ready for fantasy football drafts, so I'm here to help you out. Running back, of course, could make or break your team, the most important position of all. So I'm going to run down my top 12 running backs to let you know where they stand right now. Now, of course, things could change. Only one preseason game is in the books. Of course, injuries always happen, unfortunately. Thankfully, we got out of the first weekend unscathed, not any major injuries to report. But you never know when you have another Cam Akers, somebody who would definitely be high on my top 10 and now lost for the season. But let's go down right now as if you're drafting this very moment. This is where I would have the running backs alone. Now, of course, the first round, you're going to see a lot of running backs taken. Doesn't mean you have to draft them all before you take any other position, but chances are in any league you're in, you're going to see these guys flying off the board early and often. So here's where they stand. And I'm going to start in order because it's not going to be a big surprise. Who's number one? Let's start with Christian McCaffrey. So look, there is just absolutely no justifiable reason to have anybody number one other than Christian McCaffrey. Injuries, sure. Is there any running back who is not susceptible to injuries? Of course not. And let's not forget, this is not torn ACL or an Achilles or something, career threatening here. He's been banged up for a while, but you know what? He could have actually played late in the season. It was kind of a week-to-week situation. The Panthers did the smart thing, realized they're not going to make the playoffs anyways. They just signed him to a massive contract. There's no need to risk their investment by putting him out there. And even in the games he did play, which was not very much, 3 full games, he was averaging an insane 24.5 fantasy points per game, so would have easily been the number one player, number one running back if he had played anything close to a full season. So don't second guess yourself. This isn't the time to get cute. You got the number one pick. It's a slam dunk. You take Christian McCaffrey, and he's, of course, number one running back. Number two, this one is kind of a no-brainer too. It's Dalvin Cook. So Cook, of course, one of the top players last year at the running back position. There's really nothing changed here. There's no reason to doubt him, to doubt his team. The offense is almost identical to where it was last year. Didn't really add anything at receiver. Didn't lose anything either. But this is a guy who there were some questions going into last season. Like, he wasn't one of the top running backs taken, not at least early in the first round, because, well, he had injury history of his own. There was the holdout thing, but he squashed all of those concerns. And he's pretty much the safest running back outside of McCaffrey that you can get. So no question, Dalvin Cook is number two. Now, here's where you can kind of wonder, well, who should be number three? Is it Derrick Henry because of the season he had? What about Alvin Kamara, the guy who's the top scoring running back in all of fantasy in PPR leagues last year? I have Alvin Kamara. Well, I know there's some questions because of the offense. We really don't know, even at this point, who the starting quarterback is. And either way, it's going to be a different offense because Drew Brees been there forever. And, just like a lot of quarterbacks, as they age, mastering the dump off to the running back, Drew Brees was excellent at handing it off, dumping it off to Alvin Kamara. So is his target share going to go down? Is this offense going to look different? I had those same concerns, but you know what? Not anymore, because it doesn't really matter who's at quarterback, because honestly, this offense has to run through Alvin Kamara because it's not Drew Brees anymore. And now that Michael Thomas is out for who knows how long, right? At the very least, you would say half the season because of the surgery. Maybe all the season. Is that relationship broken? Who knows? Who cares? It doesn't matter. This team is hurting at wide receiver. Right now, their wide receiver one is Marquez Callaway. Sneaky late round pick, by the way. But it doesn't matter who is there. It's not the same offense. There's no Breeze. There's no Thomas. They are going to have to rely on Kamara a lot. Not just running, but also catching the ball. Maybe Taysom Hill, does vulture some touchdowns. Maybe Kamara doesn't score as many touchdowns. Maybe he doesn't have that huge 6-touchdown game in the fantasy playoffs. Well, you can't count on that anyways. So possibly his touchdowns go down, but as far as the receptions and the targets, which makes him such a valuable PPR asset, I really don't have any concerns about that anymore, especially with the Thomas injury. So sticking him there at number 3, and then go to number 4. It's not Derrick Henry still, it's Saquon Barkley. So hear me out. I know there's questions about Barkley, but he looks like he's on track to play, if not week 1, either week 2, or probably at the very latest week 3. So you say, well, why would I take a guy that I know is going to miss a game or two already in the top 4? Because what are you worried about? Week 1, week 2, or week 15, week 16? If anything, the fact that they're bringing him along slowly and easing him into action should make you feel better about his long-term health. The fact that he might be more rested, more ready, and that they're not going to do what they did last year and was probably play him too soon. Well, the year before when he was banged up, and that they're going to take it seriously. He's going to be fine. I think that everything we've read from a medical standpoint, he's good to go. He is one of those exceptional athletes, and they wouldn't put him out there if he wasn't ready. The fact that they added receivers and all this, that should help him. The fact that they do have to focus on something other than just Barkley, opposing defenses, that is. So I really don't have that many concerns with Barkley. He's one of those all-around backs who will get not only the carries, but also the receptions. Let's not forget, this was a guy who just 2 years ago was the number one back in all of fantasy. Will he be that same level of player? I don't know, honestly. Can't say that he will or won't. But again, you're taking him in the 4th pick, not the top 3. There's not enough question to really justify dropping him lower because he does have that potential to finish as the overall RB1. Not saying he's necessarily going to surpass McCaffrey, but he does have that upside. Let's not forget that last year, there were people taking him over McCaffrey in a lot of drafts. Of course, neither one of those picks paid off, so it doesn't really matter. All right, now Derrick Henry. So, those of you who play fantasy, you probably know this already. He rushed for over 2,000 yards, led the league in rushing and touchdowns. Rushing touchdowns was 17. How can you justify putting that the number 1 rushing running back at the number 5 spot? You already know where this is going. He isn't that active as a receiver. Well, how much does it matter? If a guy runs for 2,000 yards, who cares how many balls he catches? Well, you should care because even with that historic season, not that many guys have gone for 2,000 rushing yards and leading the league in touchdowns, which we know touchdown regression is a real thing, right? Even if it's just by a couple of touchdowns, that's lowering his fantasy production. Even with that type of season that he had last year, where did he finish as the PPR running back for fantasy? Number 3, behind Kamara, right? Behind Cook. If McCaffrey stays healthy this year, he's going to finish behind McCaffrey. We know that. Barkley, I think so too. So this seems to me like a logical spot because that's probably where his ceiling realistically is. What we've seen from him last season, it should be his ceiling. Maybe he proves us wrong again and continues to be superhuman and not only stays healthy despite all those carries that he's taken and still is one of the top running backs despite not really being a pass catcher. Maybe that addition of Julio Jones doesn't affect him. Maybe the new offensive coordinator doesn't matter. Maybe they don't rest him at all. Maybe. But again, there's a lot of maybes piling up there. I know it's not cool to fade Henry after what he's done in the last 2 years, but I think RB5 is still a pretty good spot for him because, again, we're looking for a guy this early and as far as the running backs in the very top ranks, which is going to be the very beginning of your first round draft. That is going to be that anchor, that league winner. Yeah, he can feel like a pretty safe pick, but again, there is risk attached. You just can't deny it. Of course, there's risk with all these guys, but again, don't pretend that Henry doesn't have any either. All right, moving on to number 6, Zeke Elliott. Concerns here too, but you know what? He's healthy. Injuries weren't a problem for him. He's still a young running back, young-ish as far as running backs go. Let's not forget that he averaged 104 scrimmage yards per game in the 5 games that Dak Prescott was healthy last year. Dak Prescott, is he healthy? Who knows? But he should be on the field by the time week 1 rolls around. And you know what? This offense will be fine. It will still feature Zeke. Not worried about Tony Pollard. Not at all. This is going to be still one of the best, maybe the best fantasy offense in the league. So Zeke at number 6 is rock solid. And then we go to number 7. We see Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones, remember 2 years ago in PPR leagues, was a top 5 fantasy producer at the position. Last year, too, on a per game basis, was also top 5. And this year, no Jamal Williams. I know people didn't pay a lot of attention to Jamal Williams in fantasy last year, but should have. He got a lot more snaps, especially on third downs, than you'd like to see, and he is gone, and A.J. Dillon isn't going to be that guy. A.J. Dillon is an early down back, a short yardage back, not going to be a threat. So if anything, we should see Aaron Jones see even more receptions, and so that's super valuable. Again, I'm basing all these rankings right now on PPR because that's pretty much the standard these days. So the fact that there's even less competition for touches is a good thing. Aaron Jones, maybe even justify putting him over Zeke. I wouldn't complain if you had him number 6, but right now I have him 7. Definitely a first-round pick everywhere. Now, here's where you're going to see some debate. After this point, things kind of can change depending on your league and format. I'm really getting higher and higher as the preseason goes on Najee Harris. So I know after last year, I get that we're a little worried about rookie running backs and jumping the ship because, well, Clyde Edwards-Helaire tried to say last year he wasn't worth a first round pick, and he wasn't. And then Jonathan Taylor really disappointed up until the very end of the season, and he did pay off. By that time, a lot of people had already traded or benched him and were just massively disappointed in what they're getting in return. Maybe he benefited from the soft schedule at the end of the year. We'll get to him in a second. But the fact is that Najee Harris is clearly the best rookie running back in this class, but also clearly one of the few workhorse backs. And if you'll notice that all these running backs we're talking about so far have no competition for touches, he's going to be the last guy we talk about that is in that situation. Some people are maybe projecting a little too much. I'm not saying he's going to get 300 carries plus 50 targets. Realistically, it's going to be a little closer to maybe 250, 260 as far as carries. I get that the offensive line is concerned, but you know what? In the end, touches are more important than quality of offensive line. So I think that Najee Harris is going to be a stud, and I don't mind taking him in the first round. I have him as my number 8 running back. Number 9 is Austin Ekeler. A lot of people give Ekeler love, say that he's a little underrated. I get that, and you know what? Maybe he could outperform guys like Harris or even Jones. The thing is, what he makes up for, the receptions and the targets, he might be the leading receiver as far as running backs go, maybe other than Christian McCaffrey. But we have to accept the fact that comes with less carries and possibly fewer touchdowns. So there's a trade-off here. In one sense, he does have a higher floor than some of these players because, he won't get game scripted out. He's always going to be involved as a pass catcher. But again, I just feel like the ceiling isn't as high. And your first round pick and a guy that's going to be a very top running back for you, RB1, maybe you want to chase that ceiling a little more. That's why I'm more interested in Harris, who is probably going to have the potential to have more of those monster games. So I get that Ekeler with Herbert, that's a nice combination. Herbert targeted him a ton. Regardless, they're still going to work in some other running backs, whoever it is in LA. Maybe it's Larry Roundtree this year, maybe Justin Jackson, although now that he's hurt, who knows? Is Joshua Kelly ever going to be productive? I don't know, but they're going to keep trying to put somebody in as their goal line short yardage back. And, Austin Ekeler to me is a nice pick, but again, I can't put him really much higher than those other guys we talked about. So number 9 feels about right. Number 10 is Jonathan Taylor. Arguably he could jump up a couple of spots, maybe even be a top 6 pick. I wouldn't complain if you did that. I have him 10 right now. Obviously, we know Quentin Nelson hurt. That is going to affect him. Carson Wentz, is he going to be back for week 1? It is possible. I don't think so. I'm thinking more like week 2 or 3. But again, there is risk there because of the injuries. And this is a team that we don't really know what the offense behind Carson Wentz is going to look like. But we know they'll feature Taylor. The same issues I had earlier talking about, Taylor maybe not being fully involved on 3 downs because of Nyheim Hines, as a pass catcher. Marlon Mack is healthy and back. I don't think he's going to really have a big role, but he's there. And so Taylor, they might be, a situation where it's a guy that they kind of preserve and they're not going to run him into the ground as a young runner and preserve him for the later part of the season, which would be nice if he's productive in the fantasy playoffs. But still, we just don't know that the number of touches he's going to get is going to outproduce that of guys like Najee Harris, Aaron Jones. So that's why we can't have Taylor quite as high, but it wouldn't surprise me if when it's all said and done, his total fantasy point production does put him in the top 5. All right, and then 2 more here. Number 11, Antonio Gibson. This is a little bit of a risky pick. I haven't heard much about the turf toe lately. I think that he is healthy and ready to go, so that's a good thing. What is he going to be like as a runner, though? Let's remember that he had a nice rookie season, but he did exceed expectations. We didn't know what to expect, really, because, he was barely used in college as a running back. And he did have a limited role also as a pass catcher. That's why J.D. McKissick, for a lot of best ball leagues, was a league winner. And for a lot of PPR leagues, was a guy you could put in your flex spot pretty much week in, week out. This offense will be different because Ryan Fitzpatrick is at quarterback. Different style, not going to dump it off quite as much to the running backs. So less production for McKissick, but less production for Gibson even too, who didn't have a lot as a receiver. They say they're going to use him a little bit more, but still there's a hard cap on how many receptions he will get, which is Ironic because he also played receiver in college. But for whatever reason, he's not being used in that capacity in the pros. Now, Gibson did get a lot of his production also in a few games, had the benefit of playing the Cowboys twice last year. He'll do that again this year. Let's see if that defense is any better. But he was a guy who had a lot of volatility. He'd had a couple of monster games where you have multiple touchdowns, big yardage, and a lot of duds too. So you're just going to have to live with that. That's why Gibson isn't going to crack the top 10. He does still have room to grow. But again, this is somebody who I just don't feel like is going to get as many touches as some of the other guys we've talked about already. And then I know I'm going to get heat for this, but all the way down at 12 is Nick Chubb. Why is Nick Chubb so low? Okay, so Nick Chubb was actually one of the most productive running backs in terms of fantasy points per game, had some monster games when he came back, but he is sharing time with Kareem Hunt. We can't ignore that. Kareem Hunt actually outscored him in terms of total fantasy points in PPR last year. Well, that's because he was healthy and Chubb missed 4 games. Now, on a per game basis, Chubb is more productive. But again, this is a guy who also could get game scripted somewhat out. It's not like he's going to be riding the bench if they're down. But still, this is a team that does look like it has a good defense. It should be even better this year. Good offensive line. So if they are smart and do what they did the second half of last season and run first and run second and only throw if needed, then that's a formula for success, and Chubb will be probably a top 10 running back. Thing is, he just feels a little safe for a first round pick here because, again, that ceiling isn't as high for me as it is with a guy like Najee Harris or even Jonathan Taylor. So, taking Chubb earlier is fine. I think that he could pay off as far as his return on investment for wherever you draft him, if it's in the first round, as long as it's not in the top 6. All right, we can't go more than that. There's no way he's going to return that kind of return on investment. But this is a guy who I know he's a fine, solid RB1. But again, if you're playing it that safe, I would only do that if you feel like you can then come back around and get really high-end wide receivers, second round, third round, and then take another running back later who is going to give you that upside. Take some rookies, take some other guys, who could flash, because Chubb, again, when you play too safe in the early round, that's not what wins leagues. So again, nothing against Chubb. He's fine, but we just can't ignore the fact that he's also limited as a pass catcher, does have competition for touches, and has some injury history. So all that combined means he's a little riskier for me in terms of that ceiling that we're looking for. All right, that's my top 12 at running back. Plenty more guys we could talk about. We'll do that for another time. Don't forget also wide receiver top 12. Check that out here. And we're going to be here all off season long to help you prepare for your draft and dominate in fantasy this year. All right, thanks for watching.